friends. This is Rick, and we're doing something a little different this week. It is Memorial Day weekend, 2020, and the weather is beautiful outside right now here where in central Iowa. We were suffering a bit of a drought. It's much worse to the west of us, but it's cool. The humidity is moderate. Supposed to stay in the 70s. It was like 97 yesterday. Is that a crazy change or what? They kept crying about rain. We're going to get 2 inches of rain, 2 inches of rain. We have not seen that rain in 3 days. They keep saying it. I have yet to see it. But it's a beautiful day out there. And I had to work most of yesterday, of course, but in order to enjoy the day off. And so we're only going to do one video for this week. I have some other stuff in my mind, but I'm going to talk about ancient civilizations and human arrogance. Now, once again, I am not an educated individual when it comes to this sort of stuff. I have the equivalent of a 3-year college degree in computer technology and computer aided drafting, CAD tech. And I drive a grease truck because I get sick and tired of you sit in a cubicle all day long. It sucks your soul. I'm just saying, there's something different. Anyway, it's human arrogance, and it's always been that human arrogance that enforces a certain dogma or belief on everything. And growing up as a kid, I remember the history books and my history classes and geography and things like this back in the day when there was a certain view on how certain things would be, historically speaking. And if anybody come up with an idea that was outside that parameter, they were shut down. They were ridiculed. They were pushed off into a corner. In some cases, in many cases, defunded. That's a popular term today, defunded. But it's because they wouldn't follow the normal dogma of how humanity developed, how our ancestors gained technology, etc., etc., etc. One of those reoccurring themes that's always been a controversy, is the story of Atlantis is a great example of this. This great supposed kingdom or empire or civilization that existed 10,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago or 50 years in the future, depending on who you ask, because there's always somebody, right? And that's just not possible. And yet, we have this great civilization today that came out in the back, basically in the last 60 years, maybe the last 100 years. You want to go back to the turn of the century, so 120 years. And at 120 years, in the generation, my grandfather's generation, they went from horse and buggy to gasoline-powered cars to jet airplanes. They went from telegraphs, from Pony Express to telegraphs, to telephones, to cell phones. We have computers today. We have things today that in my generation, your generation, in our lifetime, are heaps and bounds above what they were 20 years ago. 50 years ago, they didn't exist. The very fact that we can do what we're doing now and share these opinions and do these little videos, and they're tens of millions, and post them out there for all affinity, for as much as we know, is a result of 120 years of intense development. And I'll make the case, like I did with my Bob Lazar stuff when I was talking, when it comes to technology, that since the 50s, technology's just is skyrocketed. It's diversity, what we're capable of, what we're doing. Technology breeds technology. A faster computer breeds a faster computer. The next best thing. Right now I'm working on a device that's 20th the size and 50th the weight of the gateway I had in the mid 90s. It was a huge tower and a huge monitor. The monitor took up half my desk. And then we went to flat screens. And now CRT monitors are dinosaurs. And yet the last one I bought cost me $500. And then 2 years later, they're all flat screens. And you couldn't get one. It was crazy. I spent thousands of dollars for that gateway that does a half the capacity what this laptop does. And this laptop cost me $400, $500. So a $3,000 gateway to a $500, whatever the heck this thing, Hewitt Packard, which is ironic because my first actual computer was a Hewitt Packard, and it was a piece of, anyway. So, human arrogance. The signs may or may not be there. When they talk about a past civilization, first off, humanity has been around for millions of years. Homo erectus has been around for millions of years. Various forms of homus has been around for many tens of millions of years or hundreds of millions of years. They can't quite agree on that. And then at the time, there was different versions out there as well. Because when we look at the cavemen per se, there are different types of human lines that either merged together to become what we are today, or died out, or were bred out of existence. All right. And yet, and I'm not talking racial. Get that out of your head right now. We're not talking about skin tone. We're talking about personality type. We're talking about physical attributes, not color, but large cranial diversions. People with different sized heads, for example. I've known people with much huger, thicker eyebrow and head formations that imply, maybe suggest, someplace back in their bloodline there's a bit more going on there. Cro-Magnon man or something like that still listed in their bloodline. And then there'll be people, and I'm sure some of you guys too will go, oh, that's BS. Is it? All right? I'm just pointing out, it's just like that running gag or that running joke when they say, I had a teacher and I swear up and down she was an alien or he was an alien. Or there's that guy driving that truck the other day. Sure looked like something from another world, something out there. So the possibility that aliens are here and breeding with humans or have in the past is not totally irrational. We can't prove it. Or if we could, perhaps we can prove it, but there's certain parts of the establishment that rail against the idea and insist it's not possible and immediately shut it down or just do their best to disprove it or force the others to acknowledge and toe the line, which is, once again, human arrogance. We look at evidence. Well, I'm looking around my room right now as I'm talking to you, and I see very little here that would survive a million years of decomposure. If you left it out in the sun, undisturbed, for 10,000 years, 90% of, probably 95% of what's in this room would rot away, disintegrate, or discombobulate itself to the point where nobody would recognize it for what it was without some very intense study and research and lab work. And then even then, most likely it could be attributed to just some organic material, some aberration of way things were or are, and passed off as not something being technologically advanced. The truth is, this table's wood. 100 years, wouldn't be here. If they left it out in the sun and the rain, 100 years, pretty much should be gone. This laptop's plastic. All of its components are going to diminish. It's going to become brittle. It's going to fade. Give them 10,000 years. Weather and rain, it's going to be not recognizable as a laptop. Right? Pieces of paper here, a couple years at most. Me, what, 6 months? Maybe my bones will still be out there, and then after that, then that's just if you left it on the surface. But we know from fact that erosion and airborne materials build up, things change. Anything you leave in your yard for 50 years, you're likely to come back and find part of it buried. It's just a matter of time before it sinks into the ground. Even the concrete. You could leave your car on a concrete platform, and 1,000 years from now, most of it, if not all of it, will be buried under the underground because it's just the way things work in our world. If it doesn't turn into rust and fall into the ground that way, the ground itself will swallow it up. Just give it an amount of time. Now, there's occasional places where this doesn't occur. I mean, when we look at some things, you look at some stuff, it gets buried under vegetation and other things, and the only way to find it is through technology or by dumb luck, stumbling across something in the middle of a jungle and going, well, what is this? And then start digging. In any case, these things were there thousands of years ago, and look at their condition now. They weren't there 100,000 years ago, but that we know of. But our current technology and our current specialists insist that these ruins existed X amount of thousands of years ago. And look at their conditions. One exposed to the sun and the wind, another one exposed to vegetation. Either case, over time, they're diminished. And given a sufficient amount of time, 10,000 years, 100,000 years, these ruins won't exist. So, it's arrogant to assume that we are the pinnacle of a human achievement, that at no point in time in our history, or the history of the world, was our ancestors sufficiently advanced. Well, maybe perhaps not technologically advanced as we are today in the forms that we know it today, but there are other things about humanity and the human element that we still don't, vast things we do not understand. You know, our obsession with magic and mind and the mind, it potentially has a basis in something, don't you think? Is this just pure fantasy that somebody dreamt up that, oh, this is how things work? Right? There was back in the 70s, there was this fellow who was building some strange monument to his dead wife, and I think it was in Florida. And he was somehow or another, without heavy equipment, because he didn't have the heavy equipment on his property, moving 20-ton blocks of stone and other blocks of stone of various weights and sizes around. And on occasion, he would hire somebody with a flatbed to come in to pick up some of this stone and move it to a different location. And his rule was the guy had to back the truck in. And then he was to walk down to the end of the driveway and then come back. And by the time he went to the driveway, into the driveway, and came back, that stone was sitting on the back of that truck. There's no elevator, no crane, no forklifts, nothing to suggest how this happened, other than these stories. Yet the man, the fellow who built the exotic castle for his dead wife, built that castle somehow. And how do you think that occurred? We hear rumors and stories occasionally of fantastic, impossible things that people achieve. Was it mind over matter? Was it some sort of magic, some sort of element they managed to reach inside deep and find? Or maybe this one or two individuals out of the tens of billions of, the hundreds of, well, we got hundreds of millions, or a couple, almost 8 billion, 10 billion population, a tiny tenth of a percent of possible humans out there who can do some fantastic things and are smart enough not to go around waving it in public. Yeah, okay, so it's absurd. Give me those absolutes. That can't happen. That's not possible. It's unholy. Whatever. I don't care. When we look at geography, just in recent times, okay, could Atlantis existed? Sure. A modern, for its time, an advanced society who managed to circumnavigate the globe, managed to find ways to plot the stars and the longitude and latitude that's implied, there are talks and suggestions of shared bloodlines all over the world and archaeological sites that share a lot of similarities all over the world. Whether it was attributed to Atlantis or some other institution, doesn't matter. But could they have existed? Well, sure could. Well, of course they could have. That's just human arrogance to say that they couldn't have. All right, so, for 100 million years, everybody's Stone Age hunter-gatherers, and then one day they suddenly aren't. They just develop over a century or two and turn into the first modern civilization that we accept? Or was there predecessors to that? Were there other civilizations, by the standards of the day, advanced civilization, still crude and archaic by our design, or perhaps even far more advanced than what we attribute? The rumors and talk and innuendo of Atlantis suggest things of using power crystals and energy basis stuff and mind powers and so on and so forth, which by all definitions would be considered magic. I make that argument today. If you take most of our technology capabilities we have today and you transport it 10,000 years in the past and put it to use in front of local natives at that time, but what are they going to think? If they don't burn you at the stake or kill you outright or run away in fear, just a Bic lighter alone, it would be a magical thing, a stone that produces flame in somebody's vernacular. And is that crazy? Is that absurd? I haven't the answer to that, but I'd have to believe that humanity much more clever than we are, far more clever than that. And here is another venue of my argument. I'm a big fan of post-apocalyptic scenarios. I love all kinds of movies and stories about what takes place after after World War III or the end of the world, and humanity's pulverized and put back into a neo Stone Age, where we're a scavenger state surviving all of Mad Max and Beyond Thunderdome, trying to survive on what's left of the remnants of technology, where the ability to produce new technology, or produce replacement things are no longer plausible. Our society is going to slowly disintegrate and spend a long period of time trying to recover. And at some point, there'll be hunting gathering again. And in some limited areas, agricultural communities for subsistence, because that's how humanity would survive. But yet, at some point, humanity would regain something. Whether we have to start from scratch and learn from scratch, or we were able to pilfer remains of our knowledge and procedures and technologies from the past, and rediscover them, doesn't matter. So when we look at geography over the years, we go back 10, 12,000 years, the Great Flood, the stories around the world of a Great Flood. Well, it's becoming more and more accepted today that, is it the younger, I don't know if it's the younger Dryas or whatever it was they call it, but at the end of the day, about 10, 12,000 years ago, something happened, and it accelerated the melting of most of the ice caps, or the ice mantles. And we had a ice age, and it ended fairly quickly enough that in many cases the water advanced 30 meters, 30 feet, 30 miles a day, depending on who you ask. And that's significant. Even if your water is advancing 30 feet a day, in a year, that's several thousand feet. That means your settlements would be constantly on the move. You would not have the ability to sit down long enough to grow a season's crop if you're in the floodplain, because that floodplain is going to keep advancing on you, and you're going to have to keep moving until you finally get to someplace high enough or far enough away from the advancing water that you can settle again. That's my morning Pepsi. So, just from that argument, we know indefutable proof that we had an ice age 10, 12,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, and it ended. And at that time, there was ice sheets as thick as a mile in many parts of North America and other places in Europe and Asia. And then within 100 years, within 10 years, within the summer, it's hard to say, not likely in the summer, but within a short period of relative time, all this stuff up and melted, broke up, and emptied into the oceans. Enough so that it raised the ocean levels considerably and changed the geography quite, incredibly changed it. So, most civilizations, most large concentrations of populations in history, even in modern days, how many people live within 10 miles of the ocean? I think, I don't know the exact number here in the continental United States, but I think it's something close to 40% of our population live within 10 miles or so of a coast. Maybe it's not quite that high, but I'm pretty sure I heard something along them lines. So when you look at it from that perspective, how many of these great constructs, these towns and villages and monuments and temples and what have you, that our ancestors and great ancestors would have built or potentially built or occupied, suddenly disappear? We know this for a fact because we've been uncovering evidence of these very monuments and structures under the ocean. Mile out to sea on the seabed, covered in silt. Ironically, you're going to cover up anything in the ocean far faster than you are on the land. So eventually, the ground level, your sod, your soil builds up and will cover pretty much everything given time. And if it doesn't, it's covered by vegetation, it's covered by dirt, what have you. It still gets buried. This is going to happen on a magnitude faster out to sea because silt and materials move faster and are easier to be much more fluid, literally. So the idea that these ancient civilizations may have existed is becoming more and more concrete. They did exist. The evidence is there. The proof is there. You know, there's still a bunch of diehard believers in a certain given established way of things, and they just won't accept it. But the truth is hard to change. The facts, the evidence, which you can see with your own eyes, what you don't hear. You know, when a politician sits there on international TV in front of 40 million viewers and suggests, I don't know, doing something really insanely dangerous and stupid, and then to the next day insist they never said it, well, that's real easy to sit there and make that claim, and there'll be a lot of people who will buy it. Well, that person would never say something like that. And yet the day before, 40 million people heard him with their own ears say it. You know, it was live television. You can't go back and change it, but they'll sit there and try to and succeed in some aspects, in part because there's always a certain a certain type of population, percentage of your population that live with blinders on and earmuffs over their ears and embrace ignorance because it's just easier, or they want to believe something that's so bizarre. See, I can make that same argument in my case. I want to believe that humanity had successful attempts in the past. It just makes sense to me that that's not going to have 20 million years or 2 million years of eking out, chasing the critters around and eating things off of bushes before somebody goes, oh, you know, if we stick around where these bushes are, we could eat these things all the time. And maybe if we, and then somebody else goes, oh, hey, you know, if we take these things that are in the middle of these fruits of these things we're eating that we can't eat, I noticed we throw them out and then new plants grow. Well, maybe if we purposely put them in the ground, put water on, hello, right? Innovation leads to innovation, accidents lead to revelations. I mean, makes sense to me. It would happen much more frequently and much more faster than what some elements of would suggest or imply. So when I look at the possibilities, yeah, we could have had a number of even neo-civilizations, early civilizations, thriving community states, communities of people living along the coasts and the river valleys and things like this, and then suddenly been inundated by huge amounts of water, forced to relocate and leave behind a lot of their assets and resources and start over. Absolutely. And then, of course, then there's the human element too. This is probably the most destructive part of nature, is the human element. The fact that humans constantly are, driven to conflict, where they want to go and they want to get with their neighbors, and then they want their neighbors' stuff. They want to take their neighbors' stuff. They want to kill off the neighbors, maybe keep hum of the neighbors for what have you, and then the next group of people come along and see what they got, and it's repeated over and over and over again, until enough people get together with enough prowess to sit there and go, enough's enough, and then fight off those people that are doing it, and then return the favor in the other direction, except, get bigger and badder. This is where civilization tends to grow and become accepted, and probably far more so than this, I'm going to sit down, let's all get together and start agriculture. Right? Agriculture was in part and partial a piece of the pie. But so is conflict, and human nature is a bigger piece of the pie. So when we have great floods or an asteroid, even a modest asteroid impact, as has been known to happen, I pray to God we never see it in our lifetime. Our technology base is getting powerful enough and strong enough that potentially we could avert this from happening. But it wouldn't take much more than an asteroid the size of a nice, good-sized, freighter hitting the planet atmosphere and hitting the place in the wrong spot or the right spot to basically screw us over for a long time. If you were to put enough ash or dirt in the air to drive the temperatures down by 20 degrees worldwide, we would have a miniature ice age developed, potentially. If this cloud base got into the cloud atmosphere and diverted enough of the sunlight for enough period of time, we would be in trouble on a large scale because our society's not developed enough to counter that. Once that occurs, we would be hard pressed. We get a modest pandemic, and look what happens. The United States is a mess, and this is a modest pandemic. Can you imagine a pandemic on a truly epic scale? One that absolutely has a 10% mortality rate, where 1 in 10 people are going to die. How bad off this country, this America, would be, because based off how it's handled things so far, it's catastrophic. I get mad every day when I hear these reports from people talking about, well, there's 30 million people out of work and people are going to lose their homes, blah, 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 and that these politicians want to blame the people. I said, the politicians, whether it's state or federal levels, are the ones that said everybody needs to stay home. Let's shut all these businesses down. And suddenly all these people are out of work. A big, huge piece of population. And they did nothing wrong. They didn't deserve this. They didn't ask for this. They didn't suddenly sit down one day and say, I'm going to be lazy and I'm going to just get unemployment. Because it didn't work that way. It still doesn't work that way. Yet the politicians and the people in charge seem to forget this. That this was a man-made catastrophe. Everything happened because the pandemic happened. We failed to deal with it. We failed to accept it. We failed to act on it fast enough. When we did act on it, we did it in a haphazard manner that cost a lot of people a lot of things, and they're still costing people. And yet the politicians and the people in charge suddenly are plain stupid or ignorant, and they're lying badly. My grandfather said back 30, 40 years ago, my grandfather used to say, all politicians lie. All used car salesmen lie. All preachers lie. And he was a preacher. He had his own church. It was a Bible thumping, I'll throw the Bible at you if you fall asleep in my chapel kind of preacher. Fire and brimstone kind of guy. But he also said the truth is relative. The truth is objective. The truth is what you want to hear. And it can be twisted and turned and spun in many ways. But it's the action of people that is the truth. How people act and react to a situation is pure, unadulterated truth. All you have to do is sit back a minute, forget your political leanings, show a little empathy for those who are in the situation that you may not be in. And if you're in that situation, accept the fact that it wasn't your fault that put you there. And those people who put you there suddenly, at some point, just forgot that that's how that worked. I'm just pointing out this is how civilizations can possibly fail. It's not going to fail tomorrow or today, but if this had been a much worse, much more potent pandemic, just how bad really things could really be, where we could be, and where could we be? We could be in a civilization-ending moment. And the world history, not mankind's history, the history of the world, the unspoken, unwritten timeline of Mother Earth has seen that happen many, many times over. Whether it was a rock from space or a sudden breaking of an ice dam, a climate change severe enough to change the coastlines for hundreds of miles inland, is a great, just the beginning. We're not talking human history. Human written history is only a handful of thousands of years old, 4,000 or 5,000 at best. Which is ironic because I believe history goes back far, far more than that. And it's been lost. It's been destroyed. It's been subsumed by Mother Nature and by the elements and so on and so forth. So Atlantis may have existed. I believe that variants of Atlantis did exist. Atlantis itself, as we deem it, as we view it, as we envision it, probably not, perhaps. Who knows? other human congregations that became thriving communities? Well, you'd be, how can you make the argument that didn't exist, that didn't happen 100,000 years ago? That's just absurd, in my opinion. So, anyway, that's my take on human history, the possibilities. What do you think? What's your ideas? What's your opinions? Be honest about it. Be honest to yourself. Stop away, take a step away from the accepted dogma that this is how history had to be. And imagine how history might have been or could have been. It probably was. Till next time, this is Rick. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend.